back to Dr. O Solutions. My name is Oleg Nikishin. I'm founder of Dr. O Solution. In this video, I will show you how to troubleshoot oil and water ozonating setup. It could be some troublesome experience ozonating oil or water when all of a sudden you have no bubbles, and that we will cover in a minute. But first, let me show you what do you need for this kind of setup if you're first time seeing this video. Number one, you will need oxygen source in order to produce pure ozone. Not the air source, oxygen source. The air contains up to 23% of oxygen. It's very low concentration. You don't want to have it for your ozonating water. If you want to have high concentration ozone in the water or in the oil. So could be two setups for oxygen is oxygen concentrator and medical oxygen tank, or could be industrial tank. Then you will need ozone generators. Here we have 3 generators that we offering you. One is Medical Grade Ozone Generator. Primary design for that was to produce proper flow for therapies, and it produces only 0.3 gram per hour. In the therapy, you do not need high concentration. You need the proper concentration that your body can handle this ozone. High concentration ozone in therapies will kill you. Don't do that. So but you can still ozonate water with this, no problem, in the small batches or in the small oil batches with this, no problem. So we do have other generator that we offering you. This generator, and we specifically designed it for oil and water ozonation. It's quite simple, but it's producing 1.5 grams ozone per hour. So this is 0.3, this is 1.5. So as you can see, it's almost 7 times more. There is another unit that we're offering you. This one produces up to 5 grams ozone per hour, but on a high flow. So I'm not going into too much of the details, but in order to produce high concentration of ozone or proper concentration of ozone, proper feed, oxygen feed has to feed this plasma. Otherwise, you don't know the outcome. Okay, that's what we have on the setup. Now, what we have for you for oil and water ozonation is we have 4 different kits. This is standard neck mason jar kit for water ozonation. So we supply you the lead, the destructor, all connections. The jar, you go in the store and buy your own jar, and this is standard mason jar. So we do have the same almost the same setup, but only has a wide mason jar, and wide mason jar you can produce up to half a gallon ozonated water. Here is our oil ozonated kit. It has wide neck mason jar lead, so you fill up halfway the oil. There is inline ozone flowing in, and excess ozone or used ozone is flowing, let me show you, flowing out to overflow container. As you can see, this tube is much thicker, because when you start ozonating, you're gonna have bubbles. The oil will start bubbling and overflow. That's why it's gonna go through the large tube to overflow container, and used ozone will be destructed through destructor. It sounds simple till the point you're going to have some trouble that you do all setup, you connect everything else together, you turn your oxygen, you turn your ozone machine, and you have no bubbles. And that's where the trouble comes, and then all the frustration comes. So in order to understand this, we need to start from the beginning to then where we produce oxygen. Okay, let's take this away. And we will go to basic oxygen setup, and we do ozonate the water. Okay, let's do from the beginning. For instance, for a very simple setup, when we do have oxygen tank. So we do have oxygen tank. It has a low flow regulator with the different flows, as you can see. It goes directly, obviously you have to use a filter. It goes directly to an ozone generator, and then this kit, water kit, connects directly to our lure output. And you start the feed, and just watch this, extremely important. It's not going to bubble right away. It's going to take sometimes a few seconds, sometimes even a minute. I'll cover that. As you can see, here it goes. Now it's bubbling. You start ozone, and here is the process. It's quite simple. And when you do have set up with your tank, usually there is no trouble. As long as you have a tank is full, you have a flow, usually there is no trouble at all. Okay. Let's show you how to set up your oxygen concentrator with ozone generator, and that's where the trouble most of the time comes. Let's take this out of the way. Now, this is oxygen concentrator. That's what we sell. It has digital flow control, and I can set up on a digital flow. We can start from half a liter per minute to 1 to 3, 4, and so on. So it's a digital readout, a digital set, very simple. But if you do have a large one, and once that your medical office supply, you're a patient, you have large Invacare, and you want to have this connection, it's not the problem, you can do it, but that's where the trouble comes. Why? Because oxygen concentrators, they designed to produce the flow without obstruction. Because you have obstructed lungs or your breathway, that means there is a trouble. They don't need to have a pressure in the lungs that can damage the lungs. That's why the large Invacare oxygen concentrator has a flow control, concentration control. If there is no flow or blocked flow, alarm will sound and it will shut it off itself. But that remember, so we need, as I told you, we need some minor pressure in order to push this ozone or oxygen through the stone, because this stone has very small tiny holes in it. Okay, very tiny holes. We offer a few variation of the stones, but they in the microns, and we do have some even nanostones, but you're not going to use with this because the pressure is too minor to push it through. So it will require some first pressure to push that flow out of the stone to the water. So this is problem number one. Problem number two with the large Invacares, it does not produce a low flow. But if you set up 1 liter per minute, you're going to waste a lot of it out because it's not much to bubble through, and a lot of ozone will go out. And for this kind of small volume, small batches of water, you need 1/8, quarter liter per minute. It's optimal flow in order to get the highest concentration in small period of time. So and how do we do that? So we have inline flow controls, inline flow regulators. As you can see, the output goes to the port in, you control it, and output will be connected just like that. Okay. And this goes in the bubbles. That's a general setup with oxygen concentrators. Okay, let me go and show you how it works. It's very simple, but let me show you it so you will understand. And then we will go to troubleshooting. Again, we will start oxygen. So this is set up for 3 liters per minute. See how fast it bubbles. So it's way too much. So what we do, we just, let's say I want to set up half a liter of water, and see how it little, just perfect for my setup. I will even suppress more. And this quarter liter per minute, it's making 33 gamma. You see it bubbling nicely, everything is smooth, because I know our oxygen concentrator can push up to 10 psi of flow. So it does have alarm, but it's totally different than InvaCare. Okay, and there's no problem pushing it through the holes. Now, when we buy, let me shut it off, because when you buy this inline flow regulator from us, it comes with a bleeding valve. Why there is a bleeding valve on it? Remember I told you that InvaCare does have the flow sensor on it. In order to not trigger alarm on the low flows of oxygen through large InvaCare, you need this bleeding valve. And this is bleeding valve as you can see, there is a small tiny 1/16 hole in the top of this valve. Okay, so what it does, when I connect my oxygen source to it, some oxygen flow goes through it, but some minor escapes through this bleeding valve. So that's why we set it up again for 3 liters per minute, and let me start it. As you can see, you see it's flowing, so when I press it has more pressure, but so it allows me to control it, my flow through this low flow when I use my therapies. Because when you use therapy like here, insufflation or bagging or rectal filling up the bags, you don't need the pressure, you need the flow. In this setup we need the pressure. That's why what we have to do, we have to remove this valve. And you don't use this valve that comes with it for oil and water ozonation. You see? So I can suppress now up to half a liter. And this is working fine, as you can see. And now it's bubbling. Now, as you can see, we connect directly oxygen just in order to troubleshoot to see how it will flow. Let me suppress it a little bit. Now, let's do the same setup, but connect the inline ozone machine. What we will do, we connect output from inline to our ozone generator, and ozone output we'll put to water ozonation kit and start ozonating. So now we have proper setup and everything is working and flows fine, as you can see. So again, I can suppress it, lower, high concentration, higher flow, less concentration, low flow, high concentration. I know from my experience, I love to do it about 1/8, 1/4 liter per minute. It's optimal for this kind of volume. All set up and easy. It flows inline regulator, it goes to ozone, bubbles of water, everything is fine. When we do with the tank, setup even is easy because we simply set up flow on the regulator, feed it directly to the ozone generator, and this thing going back. So, but what could happen when you have no bubbles? And this is a lot of times, especially for first-time users. They said, Dr. O, we follow your instructions, we set up, everything is fine, it's supposed to be fine, but no bubbles. Number one, first check oxygen source. We do have a few calls when I said, do you have oxygen? Yes, I said, would you check please? They checked and they said, my tank is empty. How come? I just brought the tank. So tank supplier gave them an empty tank. It does happen, so make sure, so when you're using tank, so make sure so you have some pressure, so you have some oxygen in the tank. So that's why first check all connection from oxygen source to container bubbler. So that means how you do that I showed you, but let me explain it to you again. For instance, the leakage can be anywhere in this line. So what do? I do very simple on this. I just want to make sure so it's working, there is no loose connections here. So what I do, I just simply disconnect and connect this directly to my source. And see it's bubbling. So I know there is oxygen coming out. And I know from this point to this point everything is working fine. Some trouble is over here. So if you use the tank, do the same thing. Simply, it's very simple. Just disconnect this, connect directly to your. This is 116, as you can see, and it doesn't bubble because it produces very little flow. So I need to increase the flow. And now when I see it bubbles, I can put the quarter, it bubbles more, so I know I have oxygen flow, everything's going fine. So then we go back to our trouble. Then in this case, if we have no bubbles, we know there is a trouble in the connection to generator or low flow. So it's number one, check the source and connect your oil or water, oil ozonator container or water directly to the oxygen source. And that's what for this one, check inline oxygen flow. So make sure it flows. Now we know it flows directly. Now, the second, we're going to check for oxygen pressure. Why do you need the pressure again? Because the bubbler, we have nanostone or we have microstone. The hole's so tiny, it needs some pressure, minor but pressure. It needs a pressure in the line in order to push it through. Especially when your stone sits in the oil and you know it will be blocked. Or you fill up the water, for instance, the water you can fill up to almost the top. And the water will fill up all your tubing. Now let me show you, and this is extremely important. We're going to connect the tank again. And now the water fill up that silicone line. I'm not going to turn it on because it will make a noise, but you see if I put some dial in even 1/16, it took a few seconds in order to bubble. What it does? First it pushes the water out of the line, through the stone, back in the water. So what it does, when you have a water, when the stone sits in the water, you have a water fill up the tubing. So now not the air has to go out, but you have to push this water out through the stone, through the holes. In order to push the water through microstones, you need some pressure. That's why if you use the tank produces a lot of pressure. You can build up this pressure very rapidly and not the problem. But when you use oxygen concentrator, remember, oxygen concentrator do not produce the pressure. What do you do in this setup? It's very simple. You just remove stone from the water completely, just like that. Okay, what we will do, and this, we will go back to basic setup. And start our oxygen concentrator. To start oxygen concentrator, as you can see, we have some flow, and I know for a fact it's already oxygen's coming out because the line is clear. That's how you start it. If you have Invacare and it does not support the pressure, and then you put your stone in the water. See, it immediately starts bubbling. And then you turn ozonator on. And in this case, so we wait when the water escapes from the stone, start oxygen, oxygen flows through freely through the stone, then we submerge it, and water is not getting into the stone. Okay, this is reason number one, when you have no bubble and you have no pressure in the stone. Now, let's go to the other problem when you have no bubbles, when you do oil ozonation. Okay. The same, you have this kind of setup, you start ozonating oil, it sits there for a day, you come back, you want to ozonate again. Just don't forget, let me show you. You see how much oil is in? So that oil, it's all the way in the stone and in the tubing. And you start ozonating oil, those holes in the stone will be blocked. And more oil will be in the tubing. And the oil much thicker than the water. If my stone sits in the oil for a long time, and I connect it to the ozone generator, so this oxygen pressure that builds in not has to push only the air out or oxygen out or ozone out. It has to push that oil through the stone back, and this is impossible to do because ozonated oil gets very thick and very heavy. So that's why no matter what you start from a tank or from an oxygen concentrator, you're gonna start blowing the lines. So the line's gonna pop up everywhere, and you don't know what do I do. And in this case, what you have to do, you have to take oil out of the stone out of the oil, and make sure the oil is completely out of the line. So there is no oil in the stone. And then what you should do, let me show you again. Now we remove that water from here, and we connect the oil to this, the same setup. But we connect the oil. Again, I don't want to turn the generator on because at this point we just need the bubble. So let's start again. You see, it was a few seconds now, so we know that's what you need. You don't submerge, but you see there is a bubbling. So I know my stone is free. So then I submerge it in the oil, and you see it starts bubbling. And that's what we cover. Check for block flow in the bubbler stone. So it's the same trouble in the water or in the oil, but oil gives you more problem because it's viscosity. The oil is heavy, especially when you start ozonating oil. It gets very, very thick. And when you leave stone in the oil, it's gonna get much thicker, and it's a very problem, huge problem to get it out. But what you can do, I recommend, when you leave it and you know your oil, your bubbler is blocked, it's very simple. You just remove it from oil, you get the heat gun, just regular heat gun, and you just simply just heat it up. When oil gets heat, viscosity goes down, so it gets more fluidish, and it's easy, and the oil will get out of the stone. Then you submerge it back in oil and start ozonating. Okay, we cover all these problems in the leakage or in the pressure. There is one more issue you could experience when you have loose connections. So let me show you how you will troubleshoot that and how you can do it in a simple way. I covered that in Ozone Generator troubleshooting video, but let me repeat that. Number one, when you connect this tubing to Ozone Generator all the time, this end will become loose. And if you even connect it just like that, and this is loose, and you need some pressure, don't forget, and that's what you're going to have some very minor leak in it. What you do is very simple. You just take this, just cut the end of it, and connect it back to generator. So you know it's tight. This is tight, this is tight. So now my tank is connected to it, and I want to put some flow in it. Let's say 1/16 liter per minute. So when we set up oil or water ozonator, I know for a fact my oil connections is tight, but sometimes you can have a loose connections and you don't know it, or you think it's maybe it's loose connection inside of generator, even though every generators we send to you is a pressure tested and vacuum seal tested. Okay, let me show you what could happen when you have a very tiny leak on your loose connections, you're not tight and loose connections. This is very simple pressure tester, inline pressure tester. If you need it, you can send us email, we can build one for you. I'm gonna connect it to my output line, and I'll put 1.8 liter per minute, and you see it starts climbing. Okay, quite rapidly, and it's gonna go up till barb connector is gonna pop off. So I'll need about 15 psi, I would say. As you can see, so it's filling up. What could happen if I simply, this is diabetic needle, I simply punch the line, very tiny needle, and I simply just punch it. As you can see, the pressure is holding up, but it's not going to climb, and slowly it's gonna go down, because no matter how tiny is a hole, and this is very tiny hole, as you can even see the needle, but you can see the pressure is dropping. So that's what happens when you put nanostones, or your stone gets, or your oil gets thick, and now you need more pressure to push the ozone through the bubbles, and you have very tiny leak, and all of a sudden you have no bubbles. You see there is some pressure, but pressure is not climbing up. So we do have very tiny leak in this tubing. So if you don't have the pressure tester, so what you can do, you can just simply block the line completely, or just like that. You just bend the block the line, and your barb connector connections is not going to pop out. Remember, the pressure stays the same no matter how long I hold this block line. You're not going to have a pop off the lines, because the more pressure builds in, the wider the hole is expanding and bleeding all excessive pressure out. So that's another way to connect it, bypassing the pressure sensor, the pressure tester. I just show you the pressure with the pressure tester, so you understand the whole process. As you can see, there is a pressure in it, but you see that's making the noise. But it limits that pressure, so it limits that force that will push ozone in a heavy oil. Or you use nanostones. Many of you called us and said, well, I put nanostones, nothing happening. That's why it's nothing happening. You have leaks in the line, you have low pressure oxygen source, or something else. You have not tight connections somewhere. I think that's all. I cover most of the problems, most of the challenges you could have while you're setting up your oil and water ozonating ozonating process. So if you like this video, give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you in the next video.